Roland summoned one of his trusted guards waiting outside the door and instructed him to retrieve a prisoner from the cell and also bring Carter along. The testing grounds had been set up outside the city walls. As a precautionary measure, Roland called upon 4 squads of elite soldiers from the First Army, positioning them in a circle surrounding the testing grounds, armed and on high alert. The test subject was a death row inmate charged with robbery and murder. He straightforwardly informed the prisoner that if he sacrificed himself for the test, his family would receive a reward of 5 gold royals. After a moment of hesitation, the inmate agreed to the condition. After swallowing 2 pills, the expression on the prisoner's face quickly transformed. Veins bulged on his forehead and arms, his skin turned a deep red, and his breath became rapid. He seized a wooden sword and charged fiercely towards Carter, who stood there calmly, waiting. His speed was akin to that of a sprinting wolf, leaving small craters in the ground with each step. The opponent was nothing more than a murderer, lacking any formal combat training apart from his inherent ferocity. Yet, he was able to hold his ground against Roland's chief knight. Roland gazed at the 2 figures in the distance, realizing that the church had not lied. If this drug were to be used by well-trained knights, their fighting prowess would be unimaginable. A deep gash was slashed across his side, blood flowing freely from the wound. Such an injury would significantly hinder the movement of half his body, but he appeared unfazed. He turned around and lunged at the knight once again. Carter employed the same tactic, delivering a powerful impact that made the criminal stumble back 2 steps. The wooden sword also snapped in response to the forceful blow. Carter threw another wooden sword at him, but the criminal did not catch it. Instead, he looked up at the high wall. As Roland locked eyes with him, in the blink of an eye, his speed reached an unimaginable level, akin to a galloping wild horse, charging toward Roland. Carter shouted for the soldiers to shoot the criminal, and at that moment, the other soldiers had already pulled the trigger. Blood spattered from the criminal's back, yet his speed remained unabated as he swiftly broke through the encirclement. The criminal leaped into the air, effortlessly scaling the several-meter-high wall. Just as he was about to strike Roland, a woman appeared before him, holding a green flame in her hand. Immediately after, another woman in white emerged, wielding a gleaming silver dagger, slashing at him. The injured soldiers were swiftly healed by Manhwa's abilities. They were already familiar with the power of the pills. The black pills had equally astonishing effects. Even a severe slash that nearly severed their ribs or a close-range strike couldn't halt their movements. If it were an ordinary person, they would have long lost their combat effectiveness due to the pain. What troubled them, even more, was the fact that the church was willing to offer such substances. Had they not considered the possibility of the new king using the pills against them once Grey Castle was unified? Unless, they held even stronger cards in their hands and simply didn't care about such an eventuality. Roland sighed as he contemplated the situation. He had initially planned to resolve the town's issues of population and insufficient funds by attacking the Changa stronghold. His focus would then shift to education, production, and agriculture, aiming to transform the border town into a city within a short period of time. As for weapon research, he had intended to set it aside temporarily. However, it now seemed apparent that military development couldn't be neglected either. Flintlocks still needed to be produced, and the research of new weapons, such as the breech loader and cartridges, should be prioritized on the agenda as soon as possible. After careful consideration, Roland concluded that the danger posed by mercury fulminate was too significant. Instead, he decided to invest in recruiting a group of alchemists. He would establish a laboratory in a corner of the town and allow them to explore and experiment on their own. After dinner, Roland called Anna and Scroll into his office. Every night, he set aside some time for teaching sessions. Suddenly, Roland heard a faint sound of breathing. Nightingale had unknowingly fallen asleep on the sofa, perhaps finding the lessons akin to a lullaby. The mist that veiled her mind dissipated, exposing her less than graceful sleeping position in front of the 3 of them. The prince couldn't help but shake his head with a mix of amusement and exasperation, deciding to conclude today's lesson. He gently removed his coat and draped it over her, extinguished the candle, and closed the door along with Anna and Scroll. Upon returning to her room, Anna tossed a cluster of green flames into a large wooden tub filled with water. Soon, steam rose from the surface, indicating its heat. She undressed and stepped into the tub. When the witches wanted to cleanse their bodies, they would seek Anna's help to heat the water. After all, fetching hot water from the kitchen was quite troublesome. The revelation seemed to astonish His Highness, as if he found it difficult to accept the practice of reusing bathwater. At this thought, Anna couldn't help but find it amusing. For a normal resident, it was a luxury to bathe once a month, so the practice of reusing water multiple times was nothing out of the ordinary. Anna reminisced about today's lesson. Roland had mentioned that the world is composed of countless tiny spheres, so minuscule that they need to be magnified millions of times to be visible to the naked eye. Raising her right hand, the ethereal flames of magical energy glowed like a cluster of fireflies, motionless at her fingertips. Suddenly, a thought struck her. If everything was composed of these tiny spheres, could she make herself as small and spherical as they were? Anna closed her eyes, envisioning herself as a conglomeration of countless particles. The flames began to undergo a transformation. The next morning, Roland was still in a blissful dream, driving tanks, and aircraft carriers, and Gundam. Nightingale excitedly called out to Roland, her face beaming with joy. She exclaimed that Anna's abilities had undergone another transformation, unlike anything she had ever witnessed before. Anna's magical form was astonishingly solid, almost like a physical entity. Roland quickly washed his face and dressed before following Nightingale upstairs to the second floor and entering the office, where the attention of the 11 witches immediately shifted towards him. In the morning, as Nightingale passed through Anna's room, she noticed Anna sleeping with her head resting on the desk. Upon closer inspection, Nightingale realized that the magic within Anna had taken on a fixed shape, resembling a continuously rotating cube. Anna recounted her experience to the other witches, explaining the concept of the small spheres, vibrations, connections, and the changes in her abilities. However, they still appeared perplexed, unable to grasp the connection between these elements. Anna had successfully reshaped the form of her flames, allowing them to coil and converge according to her will. With this newfound ability, Anna attempted to slice through an iron ingot, utilizing the formula S equals pi r squared to cut out a perfect iron circle. Roland asked to see Anna's new ability. Anna extended her finger, and a mass of black flames materialized out of thin air at her fingertip. It appeared similar in shape to ordinary flames, except for the fact that it lacked any luminosity. Anna was able to alter its shapes, from a cube to a blanket, to strings even thinner than a human hair. Roland couldn't help but marvel at Anna's brilliance. Apart from calling her a genius, he couldn't think of a more fitting description. The fact that she could immediately comprehend and apply new knowledge to her abilities after learning it that same night showcased her exceptional thinking and absorption abilities, which only highly gifted individuals possessed. Anna's transformation also sparked his interest in delving deeper into the essence of this world, eager to explore its true nature. Roland made the decision to appoint Scroll as the teacher and initiate the teaching sessions for the Witch Alliance. Later that afternoon, Roland gave the surrendered knights from the Changji stronghold a chance to redeem themselves. Some of them were assigned as farmers, while some were assigned to breed animals. The knight brought into the reception hall was tall and impressive, exuding remarkable handsomeness at first glance. This is Ferlin Eltek, the captain of the Lionheart Knight Order. Also known as the Dawnbreaker, the foremost knight of the Western Realm. Ferlin knelt on one knee and showed the utmost respect and congratulated Roland on taking over the Changji stronghold. Ferlin is the chief knight for Duke Ryan. His wife, Eileen, was originally a commoner working in the theater. They met and fell in love, however. Ferlin family did not support the marriage. As a result, Ferlin moved out to a small farm and married Eileen shortly after. Eileen finally got her first opportunity for a formal performance in the theater. Unexpectedly, the Duke watched the play and took an interest in her. Soon after, while Ferlin was away on a mission, he broke into the house and assaulted Eileen. Ever since, Ferlin had always waited for the chance to kill Duke Ryan. Soon, his left scapula felt the pinch of Nightingale's fingers. Indicating that Ferlin was telling the truth, Furland is a well-educated knight. Rather than sending him to the mines, Roland appointed him as a teacher in the border town. Furland bowed and presented a treasure map, hoping to ask Roland to spare his old subordinate Halon, who's 50 years old and illiterate. In the center of the map, there is an equilateral triangle, and the 3 acute angles connect 3 locations. One point falls at the end of the northern slope of the mountain, while another point is located within the enchanted forest, marked by a hexagonal star, presumably indicating the hidden treasure location. However, Roland's attention was completely drawn to the vertex of the triangle. It is located within the savage wasteland and represented by a jagged mountain peak, with the word Takura written on it. Roland called scroll over. The contents of the treasure map align with the miscellaneous notes recorded in ancient texts, which can be seen as indirect evidence of the church's construction of a city deep within the savage wasteland to run from demons. Maybe they could find some evidence there. Scroll's voice began to shake. She doesn't know why is the church trying to hide this history, and why does the church hunt witches as if they were demons? The hexagon star indicated on the map is only 50 kilometers from border town. Lightning can arrive there within 1 day, hopefully to scout some important info. Ever since Roland's plan to start providing the Witch Alliance education, Soroya has been tirelessly printing out worksheets and textbooks. Before Roland let Scroll go, he had something to give her. Roland opened a drawer, and immediately Nightingale started to stutter. It was full of snacks. Roland quickly closed it and opened another drawer. This time he handed over a small box. When Scroll opened it, it was a pair of glasses. Even knowing Scroll doesn't have vision problems, this is purely for aesthetics. Arriving at the mine on the northern slope, he picked up a steel pipe and examined it. The pipe was perfectly round with a smooth surface, and there were no visible pores or imperfections. In the center, there was a circular hole that was as smooth as the outer surface. When he aligned it with the sunlight, he could see a linear highlight along the surface. By using the high-temperature magical lines to cut objects, while maintaining precise control, Anna was capable of single-handedly elevating the town's industrial products to a new level. They did a series of tests to find out the maximum range for Anna's ability. Nightingale said it was 10 steps, while Anna said it was 15 steps. Roland quickly figured out they are both correct, but because of their height differences, they gave different measurements. Roland knew the next step is to have a standard measurement unit. In the Green Water Port, the influx of resources and population from Eagle City greatly strengthened the power of this harbor city. The raiders reaped abundant rewards, and the slave market became lively as well. The Black Sail Fleet, after a series of battles, not only suffered minimal losses but also acquired a large number of slaves to serve as sailors. They were currently undergoing intense training at the harbor. In a few days, they would set sail for the Strait Route, starting their first raid of the year. Now that Timothy had suffered a major defeat, there was no one left in the Grey Keep Kingdom who could stop Garcia. Given time, Garcia Wimbledon would undoubtedly become the ruler of the Grey Castle. Soon, the chiefs of the Sandstone clan and the Blackbone clan arrived. The chief of the Sandstone clan is a petite woman, while the chief of the Blackbone clan is tall and rugged, with scars covering his face and muscular arms. They both kneeled before Garcia and respectfully spoke. After the last battle, many of our warriors have been experiencing weakness and fatigue. Only by regularly taking the new pills can we find relief. However, our supply of pills is running low. We have come here to request that you provide us with more of these pills. Garcia declined the request and simply told them to wait. The two chiefs wanted to know when will they be receiving new supplies, and Garcia's chief knight yelled at the guard to take the two chiefs away while telling them to prepare either Gold Royal or Dark Water as department. After closing the doors to the terrace room, Garcia let out a soft sigh. She wasn't concerned about the Sand People or the church's pill because she had already threatened the nearby priests. If they didn't provide her with the supplies, she would hang their heads on the bow of her ship. Garcia's headache came from a letter she received, intelligence sent by her spies in another country. The report stated that the church, using the pretext of Queen Lina's hidden identity as a witch, had taken over the capital and seized control of the entire country. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door of the private chamber, a subtle scent of lavender greeted him. Bishop Malin had a fondness for candles infused with herbs and spices, particularly in enclosed spaces without windows. The fragrance it emitted brought him a sense of calm and tranquility. Aside from the nobility in the capital, there is little resistance from the rest of the kingdom. In fact, the common folk even welcomed the church's takeover. Only a few stubborn and deluded nobles cling to the past glory, but they will be dealt with accordingly. Heather suggests that all the nobility be eradicated. Heather, born in poverty, endured hunger and homelessness before being taken in by the church. With her innate sharp mind and exceptional judgment, she has risen to her current position. Maine understands her disdain for the nobility very well. He ignored Heather and continued his speech, questioning the status in the Grey Castle. Taylor said, according to the intelligence, the new king, Timothy, did not return to the capital after his defeat. Instead, he went directly to the Eastern Territory. Maine proposed to cut the supplies of pills by 30% to Garcia. This way it balances the two-party. This way, within 2 years, there won't be any soldiers left in the Grey Castle. Taylor nodded, agreeing on the plan, then said there were some issues in the Changji stronghold. After defeating Duke Ryan, Roland returned to the border town but did not respond to the church's invite. The three wondered what kind of person Roland truly was, whether it was wrong to choose Roland. "Well, what do you think?" Mean looked at Heather. Heather shrugged and replied, "How else can we see it? What were the initial rumors about him? Incompetent, bad-tempered, greedy, and lacking in skills. I don't think someone like that could possibly capture the Changgu fortress, right? So the answer is simple: he deceived everyone, whether they were nobles or us." "Are you suggesting?" Maine furrowed her brow. Defeating a duke indeed proves his exceptional abilities, but even if someone is exceptionally talented, it is meaningless without sufficient resources to utilize. Taylor shook his head. Since he chose to return to that desolate place, it means he has given up any possibility of meddling in Grey Castle's affairs and naturally poses no threat to our plans. That's true in theory. However, when combined with this piece of information, it becomes quite interesting. Heather lifted her shirt and tossed out a small piece of paper. "My personal intelligence." Maine spread out the paper and quickly scanned its contents. "Which alliance?" Returning to Bordertown, Roland had implemented a policy that offered serfs the opportunity to attain freedom by engaging in farming. However, Barav couldn't help but question why Roland was only demanding a mere 20% in taxes. In Barav's opinion, even a 50% tax seemed insufficient. Roland, on the other hand, clarified that accumulating stockpiles of gold in the basement served no purpose. Instead, he proposed levying a 20% tax, and he will then purchase the remaining crops at market price. This approach would ensure that the castle received an adequate food supply while compensating the serfs. Once they had saved enough, they could begin purchasing items exclusively available in the border town. Ultimately, the money would flow back to Roland, leading to an improvement in living standards. Shortly thereafter, Carter and Shane returned as Roland had requested. Shane headed to the Green Water Port to procure the seeds and plants. When Shane returned, he proudly presented a variety of items. First, he showcased what he referred to as pearl rice. A unique and high-quality grain. Roland knew this was a corn. Additionally, he brought back 2 ground eggs, known for their distinct flavors. This was potatoes. Lastly, he presented sugar sticks, a delightful treat that added sweetness to their meals. Also known as sugar canes, Barav stepped back a few steps, watching the three of them happily discussing. "My goodness," he muttered, touching the divine punishment stone on his chest. "His Highness is truly possessed by a devil." He had suspected this before, but now he was almost certain. The person he had just talked to could not have been the fourth prince. Barav's mind raced as he considered the drastic changes and unconventional actions of His Highness. The sudden acquisition of new knowledge and the ability to lead people out of their predicaments seemed contrary to his understanding of demons. In myths and legends, demons were typically associated with malevolence and corruptive intentions. However, the prince's actions challenged Barav's preconceived notions. As Barav read through the prince's other proposed reforms, such as recruiting commoners into the city hall and providing education for all citizens, a shiver ran down his spine. He couldn't help but wonder what the border town would become if these reforms were successfully implemented. Barav took a deep breath, clutching the god's punishment stone in his hand. There was one lingering question: could demons possess benevolence as well? If anyone dares to say Roland is evil, Barav will be the first one to disagree. The actions of the fourth prince could be considered as those of a wise and compassionate ruler. In his eyes, he had surpassed even the legendary kings recorded in history by showing genuine concern for the well-being of every citizen. He chose to stay alongside his subjects in Border Town, investing a significant amount of resources to purchase food and ensure the safety of everyone during the treacherous month of the demons. Furthermore, he introduced advanced technologies and machinery, even the which, what people referred a minion of the devil, utilized their abilities to improve the lives of the people. At that moment, Barav realized that even if Roland were to become the ruler of Grey Castle, it might not be such a terrible outcome after all. According to Shane's report, it seems that the church's pills are also circulating in Green Waterport. Although Roland is unsure why the church is simultaneously supporting Garcia and himself, he realizes that he must quickly produce the latest weapons. Suddenly, Anna appeared by Roland's side, startling him. She gently closed the door and walked to Roland's desk, holding a book with golden edges in her arms. She wanted to inquire about the quantum science that Roland mentioned. Roland couldn't help but feel both amused and frustrated, as the realm of microscopic quantum was already a mysterious and complex subject. If he had known, he wouldn't have included that part in his discussion. While thinking about this in his mind, he provided a rough explanation to Anna. She pursed her lips, seemingly dissatisfied with Roland's explanation, but quickly moved on to ask another question. By the time she stopped pressing for answers, Roland had talked himself dry. He underestimated Anna's thirst for knowledge, and at this rate, he wouldn't have much left to teach her. Especially when Roland inquired about her progress in mathematics, she answered with ease, saying it was too simple. Roland suddenly felt the vast difference between individuals. How long had it been? In just 1 week, she had progressed from elementary functions to matrix equations, and next would be calculus. Roland gazed at the woman, who was engrossed in flipping through the book and found himself lost in thought. Her delicate bangs rested on her forehead, with a few strands of hair naturally falling on her cheeks. He couldn't help but extend his index finger, tucking the strands behind her ear. She turned her head to look at Roland, almost as if her eyes filled with a smile. The serene blue pupils were no longer still like water but had rippled with waves. They gazed at each other in such close proximity until Anna mouthed a sentence without making any sound, and Roland still managed to decipher her lip reading. Nightingale isn't here. It was obvious as it could be. Roland felt foolish if he pretended not to understand. The room was silent, and he could almost hear the other person's breath and heartbeat. As he drew closer, Anna closed her eyes, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. Roland smelled the faint fragrance emanating from her body and gently kissed her lips. The sensation of softness transferred through the touch, and time seemed to freeze at that moment. They remained locked in the kiss for an unknown duration before parting. After the culture department, the spring planting of the new year finally began. This marked Roland's first step in exploring farming techniques. The serfs saw the dawn of becoming free citizens and worked with great enthusiasm. There were no overseers cracking whips to urge them on. The officials of the city hall stated that the Lord did not care about the harvest of 1 or 2 fields. The serfs were now working for themselves, and those who worked harder would reap more. Although these serfs were illiterate, Roland still insisted on lining the riverbank with flags and banners. He also required the serfs to repeat these messages. He never believed that serfs were foolish and irredeemable individuals. Just because they lacked education didn't mean they lacked thoughts and ideas. He knew that by giving them hope of becoming free citizens when they exchanged their bountiful crops for money, bought fine clothes, exquisite food, and even their own land and houses, those slogans would no longer be mere slogans. By relying on their own hands to escape poverty, they could become valued members of Border Town, and perhaps even surpass a native of the town. As Roland didn't have time to study how to turn sand into glass, he could only burn the crystal bottles that the nobles considered precious and reshape them into what he needed. Nightingale couldn't understand Roland and Anna's conversation about chemistry and acidity, so she walked back to the center of the courtyard, took off her gloves, and picked up a piece of pastry from the round table. The table was filled with palace snacks specially made by the chefs for His Royal Highness. For example, there was a snack called baozi, made from wheat flour with a soft and chewy texture. Inside, there was a filling of finely chopped meat, which contained savory juices. Nightingale sucked on her fingers one by one, leaned back on the lounge chair, and slight drowsiness washed over her. The afternoon sunlight bathed her body, enveloping her in gentle warmth. The rustling sound of the spring breeze caressing the leaves brought a sense of tranquility to her heart. She took off her shoes, curled up her legs, and lay on her side. Nightingale shifted her head and looked at Anna. Anna was holding a newly crafted flat-bottomed cup and seemed to be engaged in a serious and focused conversation with His Royal Highness. Nightingale admired this woman who came from a commoner family yet possessed extraordinary talent. If His Royal Highness were to marry a witch, Anna would be the only candidate Nightingale could think of. Although she harbored a trace of expectation in her heart, Nightingale chose to bury it deeply. Most of the time, just being by His Royal Highness's side was enough to satisfy her. She closed her eyes, and an image involuntarily appeared in her mind. Roland was crowned as the king in the grand hall of the palace. He wore a golden crown and held a jeweled scepter as he walked towards the terrace of the castle, receiving the admiration and cheers of the people. By his side, walking hand in hand, was a woman dressed in a long white silk gown, Anna herself. She also wore a sparkling golden headdress, her face covered by a veil, smiling and waving to the people. Lightning twirled in the sky, showering crimson rose petals, while the distant clock tower of the capital city chimed melodiously. Nightingale and the other sisters stood on the side, applauding and offering their blessings. Roland turned around, lifted the woman's veil, and leaned down to kiss her lips. The final scene became blurred, and as the veil fell to the ground, Nightingale saw, in a trance, that the woman with closed eyes was herself. She curved her lips into a smile and sank into a dream. The three bishops solemnly announced the church's declaration of an all-out war against the Wolf-Heart Kingdom. Bishop Maine, with his astute judgment, appointed priest Nyla as the envoy, entrusting her with a crucial mission. Alongside a formidable group of 10 Judgment Army warriors, her mission is to investigate the border town. Priest Nyla possessed an extraordinary presence, enhanced by her unusually striking pair of knockers. As she departed, Bishop Heather couldn't help but wear a mischievous grin, subtly hinting at Maine's potential interest in Priest Nyla as a lover. Tayfun sharply turned to face Heather, his eyes imploring her to treat the matter with utmost seriousness. Unperturbed by Heather's comment, Maine furrowed his brows, engrossed in contemplation. His mind wandered, questioning the truth behind the fourth prince's alleged connection with the witches. Considering Roland's debauchery history, it seemed plausible to entertain the notion that he had succumbed to the irresistible allure of these beautiful witches. Or could it be that the witches had cast their spell upon him, transforming him into their unwitting puppet? But end of the day, the rumor of Roland's recruitment of witches posed a direct challenge to the church's revered authority. The mission sent out by His Highness was completed. Tessa had visited many cities, searching for the black market and underground gangs. He spread the message among the denizens of the dark alleys in every city. As he walked back to the hotel, he sensed an unsettling atmosphere. He realized that he was being followed. Although the pursuer was discreet, Tessa noticed their presence. He reached for the dagger at his waist and turned into a nearby alley. Unexpectedly, the pursuer suddenly transformed into a wisp of mist, disappearing from sight. "It's a witch!" he realized, just as he was about to shout. But before he could speak, he received a powerful blow to the back of his neck. Instantly, he felt everything spinning, and he collapsed to the ground, overcome with weakness. When Tessa regained consciousness, he felt a sharp pain at the back of his neck. He opened his eyes and attempted to move, only to realize that his hands were securely bound behind his back, and his legs were spread apart, tied to the legs of 2 chairs. The pink-haired woman kicked the chair and held a sword against Tassa's throat. Tassa glanced forward, uncertain if he was looking at her underwear or the sword. The woman demanded to know why he was searching for witches. Tassa recalled the words of the prince, advising him to claim affiliation with the Witch Association when faced with such a situation. With the sword mere millimeters away from his forehead, Tassa didn't hesitate to say that he was from the Witch Association. "It's all nonsense," she said sharply. A woman in black approached with a large sword behind her back, clearly not believing Tassa's words. Tassa, in a suppressed voice that wanted to shout but dared not, quickly explained that he was telling the truth. The members of the Witch Association had settled in the border town, and everyone was safe. He had come to spread the information so that more witch companions could find them. Tassa even mentioned the name of the mentor, Wendy, and Scroll. After listening, the woman fell silent for a moment. Her attitude had softened compared to before. She instructed the other two witches to leave tonight on a boat with the rest of the witches and told one of the girls to deliver the message to Tilly that she would meet her later. Lightning soared through the sky above the enchanted forest. At this moment, she was on a grand adventure, searching for the ruins of 450 years ago in the depths of the forest. Half a month ago, when she heard about the mission entrusted to her by Roland, Lightning immediately accepted without hesitation. She knew His Highness was absolutely right. Even a castle, after more than 400 years, would be consumed by the overgrowth of plants and gradually reduced to a pile of dust. However, she still wanted to find this place and confirm the location of the hexagram. Following the method of creating a nautical chart, Lightning drew a grid with equal distances on a square parchment. Then, based on the distance she flew within a certain period of time, she roughly deduced the contents to be filled in each grid. When the grid was filled, it meant the area had been thoroughly searched. The approaching speed of the rain clouds behind her was faster than Lightning had imagined. The young girl could faintly hear the thunder rumbling within the layers of clouds. She descended in altitude and swiftly glided towards the forest below. After a few seconds, she suddenly caught sight of a small portion of a white stone tower amidst the branches. The top of the tower had been completely sheared off, causing it to be concealed by the surrounding trees and difficult to detect in the sky. If it weren't for evading the rain clouds, she would likely have missed it. She circled around the stone tower once but found nothing unusual, so she decided to get closer and investigate. Logically, she should have recorded the location of the ruins and then returned to Border Town. Various adventurous stories in her mind reminded her that it was not a wise choice to venture alone into a dormant ruin that had been slumbering for hundreds of years. Even the toxic gases trapped underground could take her life. "All right," she told herself, "flying in the rain is uncomfortable, so I'll seek shelter in the tower to escape the rain and take a peek inside. If I discover an underground chamber, I absolutely won't go in alone." After considering her options, Lightning succumbed to her overwhelming curiosity and approached the entrance, entangled with vines. She drew a small knife from her waist, clearing a small hole for herself to pass through, and crawled inside. The wooden door had long corroded, allowing her smooth entry into the tower. Suddenly, she faintly heard a cry, mixed with the sound of rain, making it almost indistinguishable. This sound immediately sent shivers down her spine, and the young girl anxiously surveyed her surroundings. At that moment, the cry resounded once again, this time seemingly coming from behind the wooden door behind her. Lightning couldn't help but tremble. This time, the voice seemed much clearer, and she vaguely recognized it as a woman's voice. The voice indeed came from behind the wooden door, sounding as if it was pleading for help. Lightning swallowed nervously and cautiously placed her hand on the door, gently pushing it. The damp and slippery wooden door tilted backward, crashing to the ground with a dull thud. A tall figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Lightning felt her entire body freeze as the figure resembled the demon depicted in Soroya's painting. In the dim light, the demon seemed to be staring at her, its massive body slightly leaning forward. In its three-fingered hand, it held an axe with dark red stains reflecting off its blade. In an instant, graphic images of these brutal demons slaughtering her sisters from the Witch Association flooded her mind.
Ah!
She erupted into a scream of terror. After the tour of the steam engine, Roland and Margaret returned to the castle office to continue discussing the details of their trade agreement. Margaret was extremely fond of the steam engine and wanted to buy 10 of them for 5,000 gold royals. Roland was conflicted because he didn't want to sell, but Margaret's offer was quite substantial. Margaret wore the god punishment necklace, and Nightingale was unable to use her lie detecting ability on her. The two sides negotiated well, and Roland also hoped that Margaret could provide iron, copper, lead, and other minerals. Margaret agreed to the request. Suddenly, her face changed dramatically, and she looked behind Roland with astonishment. He hesitated for a moment, then subconsciously turned his head. There, he saw Lightning, completely drenched, clinging to the window, her hands gripping the glass. Her face was filled with panic and pale, strands of wet hair sticking to her forehead, droplets falling down as if she had just been pulled out of water. Roland quickly stood up and opened the window. After Lightning flew into the room, she rushed into Roland's arms, her anxious expression instantly relaxing, and her body went limp as she fainted. He turned his head and shouted to Carter, "Quickly, call Manhwa," he said urgently. Margaret covered her mouth and approached the prince, carefully examining the young girl in his arms. Roland's heart sank. Damn it, how could he forget about her? He yelled loudly towards the door. "Shane!" The guard walked into the office in response. Roland ordered Shane to escort Margaret to the first-floor living room for supervision. "What? No, Your Highness, please wait," she said panicky, but was interrupted by Shane and let out of the office. Roland anxiously waited outside the door, while Wendy, Leaf, and Nanawa took care of the unconscious Lightning by the bedside. Wendy sat at the head of the bed, gently combing through the young girl's still slightly damp hair. The previously pale-faced Lightning now had a hint of rosy color. Suddenly, Lightning opened her eyes and sat up. Roland walked to the bedside and asked with concern what had happened. "I found the ruins," she muttered softly. "But there's a devil inside." These words caused everyone's expression to change. Scroll pushed aside Roland and anxiously asked if Lightning had gone inside. Lightning shook her head and recounted the events. She felt downhearted because she heard someone calling for help, but the demon guarding the basement was too terrifying, so she could only choose to escape. She whispered, questioning if she can still be called an explorer. Roland comforted her, saying that Lightning's decision was correct. Excellent adventurers and explorers know how to assess the situation and don't intentionally put themselves in danger. Everyone began to analyze who might have called for help and how to reach them. Roland interrupted them, saying that they would only know by going to see for themselves. In any case, the fact that Lightning returned safely was enough. Outside the window, the sound of rain had subsided, and the clouds were tinged with a reddish hue as the sun was about to set. Roland pushed open the door to the ground-floor guest room, where Margaret was pacing in front of the fireplace, looking somewhat uneasy. The guard, Shane, who had been standing by, saluted and left upon seeing the prince, while Margaret hurriedly approached him, anxiously asking, "Your Highness, how is Lightning?" Roland was taken aback, envisioning various possible reactions from Margaret, ranging from calmness to anger to indifference, but he didn't anticipate her first question to be this. Roland apologized for his earlier offense and explained why he had asked her to remove the god punishment necklace. Margaret expressed understanding and sat across from Roland. She then mentioned that Lightning is a witch, seemingly very excited about it. Margaret stood up and slammed the table, remarking that she truly is the daughter of Lord Thunder. After she calmed down, she assured Roland that she wouldn't report Lightning, and she sighed before explaining her relationship with Lightning. Margaret, at the age of 18, joined Thunder's exploration team and met Thunder and his wife during that time. Thunder discovered several islands and lands, and he drew maps of them. Lightning was born on the ship, but unfortunately, shortly after giving birth to Lightning, Lady Thunder passed away due to sepsis. As the only female crew member in the fleet, Margaret took on the role of Lightning's surrogate mother, feeding her, playing with her, and taking care of her. As the days went by, Lightning grew, the journey came to an end, and Margaret's family decided to settle down and move to Grey Castle for business. A few years later, Margaret heard the news that Thunder's fleet had perished at sea in a storm, with no survivors. However, Margaret didn't believe it. As Roland listened to Margaret's story, he realized that she didn't seem to harbor any prejudice against witches. Margaret mentioned that witches are beautiful and have magical abilities, making them the best waifu. However, due to the risks involved in the capital city, she couldn't provide shelter for witches. Upon hearing this, Roland found a kindred spirit in Margaret. Margaret also expressed her curiosity about whether Roland had taken in other witches and expressed her interest in getting to know them. It seems that Margaret has a fascination with witches and a positive attitude toward them, and asked to meet all of them. Tassa climbed up a small hill and could faintly see the outline of the border town. He circled around the hill and quickly found his target, a flagpole with a red cloth hanging from it. From the muddy ground near the flagpole, and replaced the previous red flag with a neatly folded blue cloth. Sitting down in a nearby spot, Ash extended her hand for food. Tassa opened his backpack, took out a piece of dried meat, tore off half of it for himself, and threw the rest to Ash. Seeing the witch chewing on the jerky, Tassa sighed. Although he finally knew her name, apart from a large sword, Ash didn't even have a single copper eagle on her. Despite being penniless, she dared to boldly join him on the journey to the border town. Tessa paid for all the accommodation and meals along the way. The rooms had to be top-notch single bedrooms, and the food had to be neat. Even portable food like dry rations had to be tested by Tessa first. Ash threatened that if the visitor wasn't a witch, this would be Tassa's grave. Swallowing the jerky, Ash suddenly mentioned that her companions had already boarded a ship to the fjord. Tassa knew about the fjord, and it was an extremely harsh environment. Ash said that they had established a witch's sanctuary there. When Tassa heard the name of their leader, he was shaken. It was Tilly Wimbledon, the fifth princess of Grey Castle. At that moment, Ash suddenly stood up and stared in the direction of the small road. Tassa followed her gaze, and the figures of a group of people gradually appeared in the darkness. The leading witch was none other than the prince's personal guard, Nightingale. As the group entered the border town, Ash noticed something amiss. The members of the Witch Association were holding torches, boldly walking down the streets. Even after nightfall, the town was not shrouded in silence. Dim lights flickered through the paper windows of many households, and if one listened carefully, one could hear the distant sound of children reading aloud. Candles, although not excessively expensive, were not to be used lightly due to the limited savings of the common folk. It was an incredible sight to see so many households in the town lighting candles at night, coupled with the sound of each word being read aloud. Could it be that they were teaching children how to recognize words? Winding their way through the intersecting streets, the group drew closer to the castle area. Ash could already see the dark walls and the guards standing watch in the night. She couldn't help but slow her pace, recalling what the witches had told her about their work contract with the Lord and how this place was their home. Passing through the castle gates, it became apparent that the guards were accustomed to the presence of the witches, exchanging greetings with one another. Inside the grand hall, Ash witnessed even more witches. They seemed to have been awaiting their arrival for some time, as they erupted into applause upon seeing them. Nightingale took a couple of steps forward, preparing to give a brief introduction when suddenly, a witch dashed towards them. Ash noticed the movement but didn't take any defensive measures. She could sense the surprise and joy in the witch's actions, but there was no hostility. Soon enough, a warm body jumped to hug her. In the second-floor bedroom, only Ash and Wendy remained. Ash hadn't expected to encounter her companion from the monastery here. Calling Wendy a companion felt somewhat weird. If it hadn't been for that fateful night, Ash would never have crossed paths with Wendy. In fact, she hadn't even noticed the hidden room beneath the ground, where another unfortunate soul, Wendy, had been forcibly brought in. Nor did she expect Wendy to also awaken as a witch. Ash told Wendy how she had killed the pursuing judgment soldiers and enforcers that night until the God Punishment Army arrived. The God Punishment Army was the church's elite warriors, specifically trained to combat extraordinary witches like her. The scars on Ash's eyes were a testament to that encounter. Speed, strength, and an ability to not feel pain. They were born weapons of slaughter. As Wendy tried to console Ash, saying that she could stay here and live a normal life with all the other sisters, mentioning how kind the fourth prince was to them, Ash crushed the cup in her hand, but the sharp glass fragments did not cut her. She slammed her hand onto the table, her eyes fixed on Wendy, and asked each word with intensity. "You were taken in by Roland Wimbledon, weren't you?" Upon hearing Wendy's confirmation, Ash grabbed her hand and headed towards the door. In her memories, Roland was despicable beyond measure. She gritted her teeth, wishing she could chop him into pieces. Wendy asked Ash to let go of her, and after a moment of silence, she spoke up, saying, "I can't speak for the other sisters, but I won't leave the border town." Prior to meeting Ash, Roland had already received a detailed report from Tessa. He never expected that the long-lost Tilly Wimbledon had become the leader of another witch organization and had even managed to gather a significant portion of the witches within the Grey Castle Kingdom before him. What he couldn't tolerate was the fact that she now had her sights set on his own territory. According to Nightingale's information, the witch before him was extraordinary, her abilities likely leaned towards a combat-oriented type. Roland knew that any extraordinary deserved cautious treatment. Therefore, when he received Ash in his office, aside from the invisible Nightingale, Anna stood by his side. In front of the desk, there were several incredibly thin black flames forming an imperceptible wall, ready to cut her into pieces should she dare to charge forward. Roland and Ash engaged in a fierce argument. Roland claimed that the witches in the border town stayed there willingly and that it was their best destination. He believed the fjord to be highly dangerous, with constant storms and tsunamis, not to mention the perilous journey across the sea. In his opinion, it was unsuitable for habitation. However, Ash was certain that Tilly would lead them to the fjord where they could be safe from the church's interference and create their own home. She believed that Roland's spreading of information to locate the witches would only invite trouble upon himself. Having heard the intel of the God Punishment Army by Wendy, Roland knew that persuading Ash through displays of power would be more effective than mere words. Of course, he could choose to ignore Ash altogether, but that would mean giving up on any chance of winning over the witches under Tilly Wimbledon's command. Despite the slim hope, he still wanted to give it a try. "How many members of the God Punishment soldiers can you simultaneously handle?" he asked. Ash's expression appeared somewhat puzzled, but ultimately she extended 3 fingers and said she could handle 3 of them. Roland sat up straight and told Ash, "Let's make it more interesting then." Ash was momentarily stunned, and for the first time, a different expression appeared on her icy face. Roland proposed a fair one-on-one duel. Ash gave him a look that said, "Are you out of your mind?" Roland decided to entrust this honorable task to Carter. The competition was scheduled for 1 week later, and Roland invited Ash to freely explore the border town. During that time, hopefully she could change her prejudice. Just as she turned to walk towards the door, Roland suddenly called out to her, "Wait, have I seen you somewhere before?" Although he was certain he hadn't seen that face before, there was a strangely familiar feeling emanating from the figure's back. Roland took a brief moment to recollect, and the familiarity seemed to originate from within the royal palace. "If it wasn't for Tilly stopping me, you would have been left with only one hand back in the palace," Ash remarked. As the office door closed, Nightingale and Anna both turned to look at Roland. Nightingale asked,
"Did you also grope her butt?"
Roland blushed. "What you mean also?" Anna interrupted their conversation and asked Roland if he was confident in having the knight defeat the extraordinary witch. Roland was full of confidence because he had his secret weapon. He had long been envisioning the design of a revolving firearm. Round lead bullets and loose gunpowder were simply too outdated. He hoped to create a firearm capable of rapid fire. Kyle Seachy, with unwavering determination, embarked on a commercial ship bound for the border town, along with his family and over a dozen disciples. Leaving behind the alchemy workshop in the city of Crimson Water, he penned a farewell letter to his disciple Charles, resolute in his decision to venture to the border town. Just a few days prior, emissaries from Roland had arrived, seeking to recruit alchemists, accompanied by some fantastical formulas that pushed the boundaries of imagination. Kyle had always believed that the essence of alchemy lay in seeking truth amidst the chaos, but little did he expect that the fourth prince would offer him a revelation unlike any other. The direct current generator and the direct current motor have no structural differences. Essentially, they are the same thing, and their functions can be interchangeable. As long as other machines drive the rotor of the motor to rotate and continuously cut magnetic lines with the help of the conductor, an induced current can be generated continuously. With the assistance of Mystery Moon, aka Rem, and Anna, Roland was able to assemble a simple direct current motor in just a few hours. The stator part was entirely made of wood and then imparted with Rem's magnetism ability. The commutator segments were embedded in a piece of round wood, which had a central hole for connecting it to the steam engine shaft. This construction was not only convenient to manufacture but also ensured insulation between the commutator segments. Kyle finally met the fourth prince, inside the reception hall of the castle. After exchanging greetings, Kyle couldn't contain his excitement and eagerly wanted to learn more about the alchemical formulas. He could hardly believe that Roland had authored those formulas himself. Roland attributed his knowledge to ancient texts dating back 400 years. This revelation left Kyle even more bewildered. After all, the Alchemical Association in the capital had a history of less than 200 years. Did this mean that later generations were inferior to their predecessors? Roland explained to Kyle that in the book, the scholars from 400 years ago referred to alchemy as chemistry. They put forth a hypothesis that matter is indestructible. The substances that make up everything in the world do not disappear or increase, they merely transform from one form to another. Roland offered an apt analogy, but it didn't immediately convince Kyle. Kyle then posed a question: if a piece of wood is burned to powder, no matter how it is measured, the weight of the powder is lighter than that of the wood. If the matter is indestructible, where did the missing material go? Roland smiled and explained that it transformed into gas and water. The water evaporated due to the heat of the flame, leaving behind only the residue. Kyle found it hard to believe that gas also has weight. Roland took out a beginner's chemistry book from his desk and offered Kyle a job, with the same salary as in Crimson Water City, but with the requirement to sign a confidential agreement. Barav, who had been lurking in the background, suddenly appeared, startling Kyle. Roland's first task for Kyle was to create a highly concentrated acid. Nightingale emerged from the mist, pouting her little mouth. She accused Roland of deception. She knew that the introductory chemistry book was not some ancient text from 400 years ago but rather something Roland had written himself. Roland knew that instead of directly telling Kyle the truth, it would be better to let him delve into it on his own and experiment, because people always believe in themselves the most. Suddenly, Nightingale lowered herself, leaning towards Roland, and asked who had taught him all this knowledge. Before Roland could respond, Nightingale pressed her finger against his lips, saying, "If you don't want to say it, then don't. I don't want to hear you lie." The prince handed over a peculiar-looking firearm, and Carter received it with both hands. The trigger and barrel resembled those of a flintlock musket, leading the knight to conclude that they belonged to the same type of weapon. It was not particularly large, but it felt surprisingly heavy in his hands, even more so than a flintlock rifle. What caught his attention was that, apart from the wooden grip, the entire gun was made of metal. Its sleek lines, angles, and gray-white metallic sheen exuded an indescribable beauty. Carter almost instantly fell in love with the weapon. He quickly discovered that its operation was simpler than that of a flintlock. The projectiles and gunpowder were already combined, and all he had to do was load the revolving cylinder in the middle to fire. The cylinder had 5 holes, allowing for the simultaneous loading of 5 rounds. Sparks and gases burst out from both sides of the cylinder, creating a deafening sound that made his ears ache. It felt as if someone had forcefully pushed him, causing his wrist to involuntarily rise. When the smoke cleared, the target appeared undamaged. Carter took a deep breath, firing the remaining 4 bullets, yet not a single one hit the target. Carter looked towards His Royal Highness, and Roland appeared unfazed. Smiling, Roland explained that due to the shorter barrel, pistols have inferior range and accuracy compared to rifles, so missing the target was quite normal. Additionally, with a bullet caliber close to 12 millimeters, the recoil was much greater than that of a flintlock. He reassured Carter that this was an unfinished prototype and that he needed Carter to practice continuously throughout the week. Before the competition, Carter must ensure that all 5 shots hit the target. Roland reminded Carter to remember to collect the spent casings. Carter looked at His Royal Highness and thought to himself, the prince is truly remarkable. Given time, he will undoubtedly ascend to the throne of Grey Castle. And I will do everything in my power to assist him. Ashes sat at the top of the castle, awaiting the day of the duel. As she gazed at the sunset, she felt a sense of helplessness. Over these past few days, her attempts to persuade the witch members had made no progress. Their stubbornness far exceeded her expectations. Whether they were the older, knowledgeable ones like Scroll or the young ones like Lily, they all rejected her invitation. The only difference was the manner in which they refused. Some chose to stay because of Roland, while others didn't want to leave their sisters. As for the small town, it was unlike any other town or village she had seen before. If she had to describe it, she would say that it was brimming with vitality. It seemed like the people here had endless tasks to accomplish every day. They always had a joyful smile on their faces. What kind of magic did Roland Wimbledon possess to ignite such enthusiasm among the townsfolk for building a desolate and barren little town? Just then, a chorus of cooing birds came from above. Ashes looked up and saw a giant, fat pigeon descending from the sky, landing on her shoulder. The pigeon nuzzled against her cheek. Ash asked if Tilly had sent her, and the pigeon cooed twice. Suddenly, Ashes grinned and scattered some grains on the rooftop. The fat pigeon flapped its wings and flew over, as if realizing something, and pecked Ashes with its sharp beak. While saying, "I'm not a bird." The feathers of the pigeon suddenly expanded, emitting a bright white light from between the gaps. Then, a head emerged, and the expanded feathers quickly shrank, transforming into a cascade of long white hair. No matter how many times Ashes witnessed it, she would always marvel at it. Maisie, a witch with the ability to transform into various birds, was exquisite in every detail, except for her enlarged size. Maisie was eager to meet the new witches, but Ashes sighed and briefly explained the situation. She told Maisie that the witches here didn't want to leave. Maisie thought that since Roland was Tilly's brother and they were both willing to accept witches, it was a good thing. However, Ashes shook her head and mentioned the upcoming duel in a few days. Ashes knew that even if she won, the witches here wouldn't leave. But she still wanted to give it a try. Maisie understood and suddenly remembered seeing a group of about 10 people on horseback carrying the banners of the church when she flew over a nearby city. Ashes let out a cold snort and said, "Apart from the border town, I don't think there's any other place nearby that would require the church to send an envoy. Their noses are as sensitive as dogs. Well, let them witness me cleanly defeat their knight. Then I'll tell them the news of the church's arrival. By then, Roland Wimbledon will know just how wrong he was." Above the border town, lightning soaring through the skies, while wearing a pair of wind goggles that Roland made for her, ensuring that no matter how fast she flew, the wind wouldn't sting her eyes. Lightning recalled Roland's comment about her resemblance to Ezreal, though she had no idea who Ezreal was. Suddenly, a white figure darted past the corner of her eye. She turned her head to see a pigeon spreading its wings and gliding through the sky. Pigeons were not uncommon birds, but this one was different. It was an incredibly plump, barbecue pigeon. Without hesitation, Lightning changed direction and charged toward the pigeon. The pigeon quickly noticed the unexpected pursuer and dove down, seemingly trying to escape into the nearby forest to shake off its relentless hunter. They raced through the woods and swiftly crossed an open clearing. Lightning seized the opportunity, pushed her speed to the limit, and in an instant, she pounced on the pigeon, pinning it to the ground. The pigeon struggled but couldn't break free from her grip. Lightning drew a small knife from her waist, ready to finish off her prey. But then, the pigeon unexpectedly spoke, "Don't. Help me, coo." The pigeon inflated into a ball and transformed into a human. Startled, Lightning was startled, nearly dropping her knife in fright. However, she quickly regained her composure. "You're a witch?" she asked. Maisie nodded repeatedly, confirming that she was indeed a witch. Lightning helped Maisie to her feet, and they introduced themselves to each other. Along the way, Maisie pointed to the pendant hanging around Lightning's neck. It was a tracking rune, used for locating purposes. Maisie appeared slightly annoyed because Lightning had just contemplated eating her. However, Maisie quickly explained that only witches could use the tracking rune, and it required a matching magic stone to pinpoint a specific location. Lightning's pendant was given to her by her father when she was a child. Within a few minutes, Lightning and Maisie seemed to have become the best of friends. They flew towards the mystery forest, gathering mushrooms and soaring above the castle. In the evenings, they studied together. As the days went by, the day of the duel drew closer. The weapons were still being improved, and Carter continued his training. He had become familiar with the handgun and was now able to hit the target consistently. On the eve of the duel, as the sky grew dark, Ash finally waited for Maisie to return to her room. Ash was busy cleaning her large blade when she asked Maisie why she had been returning so late in the past few days. Maisie transformed back into human form and pulled out a roasted bird leg from her pouch. The room was instantly filled with its irresistible aroma. It was a bird that Lightning and she had roasted together, and Maisie wanted to share it with Ash. Ash shook her head and was surprised to learn that Maisie also enjoyed eating birds. Maisie asked if the duel was really necessary. She knew that the witches here would never leave, and the border town is so comfortable that even she herself even wanted to stay. The prince would dine with the witches, laughing and joking together, and the people in the town didn't discriminate against witches. Plus, the witches here could play Gwent with her and keep her company. Most witches live in constant fear and uncertainty, and a stable and comfortable place to live is all they strive for. Take Maisie, for example. Before being accepted by Tilly, she had been hiding in a thatched hut in the slums of the capital city, curling up in the narrow gaps between the roof beams like a true bird, spending each night in fear. Even when Tilly decided to journey east across the sea, Maisie traveled tirelessly, reaching out to the hidden witches scattered throughout the land. Without any breaks, she had likely never experienced such a peaceful and tranquil life before, Ash thought to herself. Ashes couldn't fathom such thoughts. She was terrified, and there was no way she would leave Tilly's side. She confided in Maisie, revealing that this place was constantly under the looming threat of the church, unable to withstand the wrath of the God Punishment Army. The annihilation of the border town was merely a matter of time. What if they can resist? Maisie muttered under her breath. I hope so too, which is why I'll help them prove it, Ashes said solemnly. The following day. Apart from Roland, the spectators included Axe, Brian, and all the members of the Witch Alliance. In addition, there was a fat pigeon perched on Roland's head. Carter was not dressed in his usual knight's armor but instead wore a fitted leather jacket for ease of movement. He had a specially customized gun holster around his waist, with a revolver tucked into each side. A short knife was also holstered at his lower back. Roland had Echo mimic and amplify his voice, saying, "The rules of the contest are simple, touch and stop, no headshots, and you can surrender. As long as you don't die on the spot, Nanawa's healing abilities can quickly heal you. Any questions?" He waited a moment, seeing no objections from the two, and continued, "When you hear the bell, the contest begins." Ashes, still dressed in her usual attire, wore a black robe that concealed her body. Her long black hair was tied back in a ponytail. Ashes silently assessed her opponent, Carter, the chief knight. However, he didn't carry the typical sword, shield, or spear, and he wasn't even wearing armor. The weapon in his hand was extremely peculiar, leaving only one possibility: it must be similar to a crossbow, a long-range weapon. Ashes had learned from numerous battles that a crossbow posed no threat to extraordinary witches. If it were a light crossbow, she could even catch the bolts with her bare hands. However, judging by the confident look on the prince's face, the weapon in his hand was definitely not as simple as a crossbow. Just then, a clear bell rang from the city walls. Almost simultaneously, Ashes made her move. Gripping the hilt of her sword with both hands, she forcefully lifted it forward, causing dirt, grass, and debris to fly into the air, creating a cloud of dust and sand in the direction of the knight. The chief knight's reaction was equally swift. His weapon burst into flames and emitted a deafening roar. Taking advantage of the cover provided by the dust and sand cloud, Ashes launched a sprint from the side. In the blink of an eye, the distance between them was reduced by half. However, Carter did not move from his position, completely disregarding the sand that had hit his face. Squinting his eyes, he aimed his weapon at the approaching extraordinary witch, once again pulling the trigger. With a thunderous boom accompanied by a burst of fire, Ashes reflexively took a step to the side. In the final moments, the remaining 10 steps were covered in the blink of an eye. She held her long sword upright in front of her and forcefully pushed off the ground with her feet, charging towards the knight like a bull. The third attack from Carter's gun detonated before Ash's eyes. She felt a powerful jolt through her sword, emitting a crisp buzzing sound, followed by a numbing sensation in her right abdomen as if something had viciously grabbed her. Almost simultaneously, she collided with Carter's chest, sending him flying in the air, tracing an arc before crashing to the ground. Only at this moment did she have the opportunity to examine the injury around her waist. However, as soon as she lowered her head, a strong dizziness surged to her brain. She staggered for a moment, nearly falling to the ground. The power that had flowed through her body seemed to have vanished like water, and her limbs became incredibly heavy. Ashes used her long sword to support her body. The numbness of the wound had transformed into an intense burning pain. It felt as if a part of her waist was missing, and she could even see her own vivid red organs. Only by gritting her teeth could she prevent herself from collapsing. Even though she was severely injured, she didn't faint. She stood on the field, displaying the terrifying resilience of an extraordinary witch. If it had been regular bullets or small caliber rounds, she might have been able to endure them with her body alone. Maisie rushed to Ash's side as quickly as possible, wanting to support her, but due to her petite stature, she could only embrace Ash's legs, her face filled with anxiety. Nanoa was already attending to Carter's treatment, while Roland quickly approached Ashes, who was still holding on with the great effort. It seemed that she had been waiting for this moment. "I won," Ashes managed to say before collapsing onto Roland's shoulder. On a street, a woman bumped into a pedestrian. Someone forcefully pushed her, but she remained unmoved, instead watching as the person stumbled back 2 steps. The arrogant expression instantly disappeared from his face. After giving her a fierce glare, the person begrudgingly walked away. Most people frowned and avoided the woman in tattered clothes. And so, she slowly made her way to the entrance of the inner city gates of Grey Castle, the capital. Pedestrians were discussing the princess's coming-of-age ceremony, rumored to be attended by the archbishop as well. Ashes checked her dagger, which she carried with her. Suddenly, a thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd, interrupting her thoughts. She looked towards the inner city area where the kingdom's night order was slowly approaching in a neat formation. The knights at the front were dressed immaculately, shining in golden armor. The royal descendants began to jump off the carriages one by one. Slowly walking towards the central podium were probably the 5 children of King Wellington III. Among these people, Ashes spotted Princess Tilly Wellington. There was no doubt that Princess Tilly was the protagonist of today. Her eyes sparkled with a lively light, as transparent as gemstones. Her simple side-parted bangs complemented her refreshing gray hair, devoid of any adornments. Her beauty stood out among her siblings. The patterns on her dress were not intricate but perfectly matched her demeanor. And most incredibly, she actually looked past the crowd and directly locked eyes with Ashes. Then, she nodded slightly as if greeting her, a smile appearing on her lips. It was definitely not an illusion. In that fleeting moment, Ashes felt the same sensation. It was an overwhelmingly familiar feeling, as if they had been friends for years, warm and sweet. It didn't come from blood ties, identity, or status, but from a resonance of magic. After the ceremony, 2 guards found her and escorted her to the palace. In a secluded chamber, she stood before Princess Tilly. After listening to Ash's experience, Princess Tilly gently touched her face and bestowed upon her the name Ashes, inviting her to follow her in the future. Ashes opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was Maisie's face. Maisie blinked her eyes and then hugged her tightly. Ashes tried moving her fingers and didn't feel the expected weakness or numbness. There was no sharp pain coming from her waist either. She lifted Maisie and knew that Manhwa had used her healing abilities to cure her. Ashes put on her black robe, glanced at the sky outside the window, and walked towards the door. In the office, Ashes saw Roland again. He was engrossed in writing, presumably dealing with governmental affairs. It wasn't until the prince set down his quill that Ashes spoke up. "I won." "Indeed, you won," Roland nodded. His straightforward attitude surprised her a little. She had expected Roland to be more argumentative, but he seemed to accept the outcome. Ashes acknowledged Roland's ability to fight off the God Punishment Army, and she was curious about the weapon Carter had used. Roland mentioned it was a semi-automatic pistol, and that his soldiers would be equipped with such weapons in the future. Even unarmed farmers could defeat a well-trained judgment soldier with a firearm. Ashes hesitated for a moment and asked if she could have one. "Only if you join the Witches' Alliance," Roland shrugged. "After all, these things are still very rare at the moment." Her refusal was expected, and Ashes had come to bid farewell. She intended to return to the fjord and informed Roland that he could seek refuge there as well. Roland smiled and told Ashes to convey the same message to his sister. The border town was also a place where witches could find sanctuary. Ashes smiled and said she would consider it. Just as she was about to leave the office, the prince called her back, wanting to give her a gift. She paused, turned around, and saw a massive sword placed by the door. It was a sword crafted by Anna, made of pure steel. The sword had a smooth and even surface, reflecting an orange-red metallic luster under the setting sun. Ashes walked closer, gently caressing the great sword. She liked it very much and, before leaving, she mentioned that she would give Roland a gift in return as a gesture of gratitude.